How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of Tide Pod, the official podcast of TideIllustrated.com. I'm here, Henry Sklar, here with Tony Tsoukalas, as always. Tony, how are we doing today?
I'm doing all right. Nice Sunday, nice sunny weather Sunday. So
a bit different circumstances. We usually are only like a couple minutes from each other drive, but now we're 9 hours from each other. For those of you who don't know, I'm a junior at Alabama, and my family lives down in St. Petersburg, Florida. So finished up finals last week, and now I'm down in Florida for the rest of the summer, which, we'll make it work. Sure. But yeah, so the football offseason is done. Last week we talked a lot about the NFL draft, and we're kind of in that lull period. So today we're going to switch it up and focus more on Alabama basketball. There was a lot of big news this week in terms of the transfer portal and the NBA draft, guys. So let's just get right into it. This week, 3 Alabama draft prospects got invited to the NBA draft combine, being Grant Nelson, Mark Sears, and LeBaron Philon. All 3 of those guys declared for the draft, Philon being the big question mark. So I guess we can start with him. Tony, what do you think LeBaron Philon needs to do during his pre-draft process and at the NBA draft combine to kind of improve his stock and maybe push himself as a surefire first-round guy?
He's got to put in some good performances. I think teams are going to want to see him shoot a little bit better than he did. He's got a nice skill set and a nice grounds to work on. He plays a really good defense. He's a good distributor of the ball, and he's got a lot of areas where you could see that natural growth taking place. I think shooting's one of them. The thing is, though, I don't necessarily know if he's going to convince teams to the level he needs to be. I think they're going to, the lack of tape, inconsistency, like the lack of, consistent performances. He turned it on at the end, but I don't think we really saw that for him, throughout the whole season. I don't know. I think he could really benefit from another year, but I think, you have a strong workout. You get a team to look at his potential. He does have a lot of potential. I think that, there's always a chance that somebody falls in love with him. At the same time, he's not like some 6'10" wing, or he doesn't have some kind of crazy size. I mean, he's a 6'4" guard. Size won't be a problem with him like it is with Mark Sears or anything like that. But I don't think he does anything necessarily yet. And I'm not trying to down him to blow anybody away the way that I think he's going to have to. It's kind of, I don't mean to say all this I think LeBaron Philon will be an NBA player one day, and he could be an NBA player this year if he wants to be. I just think that his value is not where he needs it to be, and I'm not sure you can get that, just with a couple of workouts. But look, man, you just need one team to fall in love with you, and that's kind of the trick to this whole thing. So if he has a really good workout and can, convince someone to take a chance on him, at a spot that he wants, to go, I think that could be a possibility for him.
Yeah, I think as a prospect, LeBaron Philon does check a lot of boxes that NBA teams are looking for. I mean, I think Alabama immensely benefited when they finally inserted him into the starting lineup after the Iron Bowl, making him that primary ball handler, kind of using his playmaking to their strength, because that's obviously the best part of his game. And I think Philon could end up putting himself into first-round pick conversations. I know, like you said, it is a lot about making one team fall in love with you. But the biggest question mark is obviously going to be his shooting. He was a pretty inconsistent shooter this past season. But I think the thing that I take away from his shooting is that I don't think LeBaron Philon's necessarily scared to shoot the ball, which is something that NFL teams or NBA teams, still got football.
And we did see that. We did see that photo shoot of him, right, in an NFL, in an Alabama uniform. That him and Ryan Williams switched up, right?
Yeah.
So maybe he is gonna dabble the waters in the NFL.
Clemson did just have one of their big basketball players come back, and he's coming back and he's going to play both tight end on the football team and basketball for them. So maybe we'll see something crazy like that. But I think his shooting splits at the combine is going to be a big thing for him. If he can put up good numbers there, that would go a long way for helping him. But I'm really excited to see how LeBaron can shake out during his pre-draft process. I mean, like I said, his playmaking is one thing, but I mean, when you watch that guy drive into the lanes, and the way he can change pace and his layup package is really nice. I think that's special. I think those traits for him are really special, and I think that will slot well into an NBA locker room. But his shooting is obviously the big part, and we know how much shooting matters in the NBA these days.
Yeah. And let's be clear, it's not like he's just a terrible shooter either. I mean, he shot 31.5% from beyond the arc. I just think you want to see that number. There's no doubt that he would get drafted as a prospect. I think it's just when you're trying to put yourself in that, we've heard he wants to be in the top 20 or top 15 range. You've got to have an elite shooting skill. And I think that, teams would have liked to see him shoot 36% from three. And I think he'll probably develop into that. He has that capability. He's just not there yet right now. So, it's not like he's just, someone that can't shoot either. He's a great player. He's somebody that Alabama certainly wants back.
Yeah, I think the other thing with LeBaron is that maybe it was just him being one of the younger guys in Alabama's rotation, making some freshman mistakes, but he did have some inconsistencies with turning the ball over and maybe he can make some smarter decisions here and there, which is something that NBA teams are definitely going to be looking at. Because, when you look at guards who have found success in the NBA in recent years, they're all guys who make smart decisions, can both get in the paint and can shoot the basketball. And I think Philon can take his game to a really high level if he can cut down on some of those freshman level mistakes, which is going to be another maybe challenge for him in this pre-draft prospect. But I think his overall skill set, how savvy he is with the basketball, how smooth he is, how his dribbling package, his layup package, how he can get into the lane and create his own shot, which is something Alabama needed last year. That can be really good for him in terms of becoming an NBA guard.
Yeah, if I'm LeBaron Philon's agent, I'm selling him on a guy that played well against top competition. You look at him, 16 points against Duke, 19 points against Florida. I think he had let's look, 18 points against Purdue. He came with it for the big games. He showed up. And some of those games were on the road. I think the Purdue was on the road. He put up 15 points at UNC. Obviously that's not as great as we thought it was at the time. He had 16 points against Illinois. He's a guy that, showed up in those big games. And, like I said, Duke, his last game, to date at Alabama, we'll see if he comes back, had 16 points, 3 steals, 5 rebounds. And he shot, we talked about his 3-point shooting. He was 3 of 6 against Duke. So he's a guy he's got potential, and he comes in, he's kind of got that little bit of that big game or big moment clutch gene, if you will. Maybe he comes into a workout and just he's not going to be nervous. We've seen him on the big stage. He was ready for it at Alabama. So a lot of these guys, you get under the spotlight, it's an audition. Maybe you get a little bit of nerves. LeBaron, I will say, doesn't seem like that kind of guy. So he's got that going for him for sure.
Yeah, and I'll make 2 more points about LeBaron before I pass it back to you. But I think the one thing we haven't mentioned is that he's also pretty solid defensively for a guard. Take it for what you will, but against St. Mary's, what did he have? 5 stocks, 2 blocks, and 3 steals. He's a guy who can get in the pocket and create turnovers defensively. And I think, honestly, a situation, I know you'll probably love to hear this after the Patriots just picked up an Alabama player. But if you put LeBaron Philon into a situation where he can kind of learn behind some more veteran players and kind of work his way into a bona fide system, potentially like your Boston Celtics or a team like that, I think that would really benefit him instead of, putting him into a situation where he's going to have to play make a lot like he did at Alabama. If he can get somewhere where he can learn behind some veterans who have improved their shot over the course of their career, that would be very beneficial for him.
I would take LeBaron Philon on my Celtics, but they're already taking Alex Condon as the heir apparent to Kristaps Porzingis. I'm just saying, I've already got the pick in right now. So yeah,
but I'm just saying that general area of the draft towards the end of the first round might be LeBaron's range as a prospect, just because that's just where he's kind of sitting on boards right now, and if he can push himself up in the combine, I'm sure he'll be a late first.
Is he gonna yes, that's a fit for him if he wants to do that. I think the question, Henry, is does he want to do that? Because I don't think he wants to go 30th to Boston or OKC or, the teams that are going to be picking there. I think he
Maybe,
probably wants to go a lot further, higher than that.
yeah.
Really, the question here with LeBaron in terms of his draft is it comes down to, like, how much does this dude hate school? Because I don't think it's going to be a money thing either, Henry. I think it's going to be I think if he does get I look, ESPN has LeBaron Philon listed, I think, 47th overall in its prospect rankings. Even if he gets drafted before that, I think he's going in the late 20s or, in that area. That's not going to be, the NIL package he could probably get from Alabama. I don't necessarily know what Alabama has committed on the books, in terms of what they're going to be getting for an NIL budget per se. I've heard some rumors, but you look, they're shedding a lot of the NIL contracts that they had from last year. So you'd think that they'd have some money to throw to LeBaron. Theoretically, if they wanted to, you probably could throw a couple million at LeBaron, in terms of, like, you only have, really you only have to fill his roster spot. We'll get to that later. But, I think that they could probably give him a contract that's better than what he'd get if he goes picked later in the draft. I just think it's a matter of, and I believe LeBaron said in an interview that it really wasn't an NIL decision. It's going to come down to, does he just not want to go to school? Does he just want to be a professional? I mean, you live your whole life to be this dream of being a professional, and you get that chance to make it happen, and sometimes you just can't wait. You just want to go. I think it's a smart decision for LeBaron if he wants to come back, because I think he can, bet on himself and really improve that contract in the NBA. And you can capitalize now on NIL. I think he can get a pretty penny for doing it. Like, I think it might even be a better financial decision for him to come back. So it seems like a slam dunk. Obviously, injuries can happen, and with an NBA, you get a long-term deal, whatever. But I think it's going to come down to just how much does he want to be a pro, or how much, or can he wait a next year? Because I think if I was his advisor, not just taking Alabama out of the situation, if I had a chance to come back and, probably, I mean, assuming the NIL package is going to be somewhere where I expect it to be, I'm telling him, hey man, do your thing another year, and we'll be in the top 15 next year. And as a sophomore, I mean, you're still young, you got plenty of career, and you'll just develop that. It's almost like buying a house. You just fix up the kitchen a little bit, and you can sell for way more, right? And I think that's what LeBaron has to do.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, you mentioned ESPN's big board. They might even be underselling his stock a little bit. No Ceilings, who is a media group that strictly covers the NBA draft, and they're first on a lot of these NBA guys who they put up in their big boards really early in the season that eventually worked their way up. They were really high on LeBaron earlier in the season after his beginning stretch, and they have, I think one of their analysts released a big board the other day. They have Philon all the way up at 23, ahead of guys like Walter Clayton and Liam McNeely, and around some of the international prospects like Ben Seraph and Hugo Gonzalez. So maybe
he does. Maybe he does get into the top 20. It's just kind of a risk. I think he'll probably have a better feel of that after these workouts.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe that's kind of the way to go at it is, but I would have to feel pretty sure, not just one person telling me that I, could be top 20. I'd have to be pretty sure that I was going to be top 20.
Well, I mentioned some of those other veteran guards coming out of the SEC, like Walter Clayton, that Philon's kind of ranked around on big boards right now. But Alabama has a veteran guard coming out, Mark Sears. Their kind of blockbuster guy, their team leader over the last few seasons. There's obviously a lot of question marks there on what is his outlook in the NBA. Tony, do you have any thoughts on that?
I hate to down on Mark Sears. I just don't know if he's an NBA player. I think he definitely has the talent to play overseas, and we saw what he can do with his game. He is always going to be a size thing for him, and it's always, that's going to be tough to overcome. And he didn't even, you wouldn't call it a down year. I mean, Mark had a great year last season, but he didn't necessarily live up to the, player of the year, I guess standard or expectation that was put upon him when he entered the season. And I think that's not going to help his stock. He didn't shoot the you look at that dip in the 3-point percentage. I mean, if he would have had another year shooting 43% like he did in 2023-24, I think maybe then you're like, okay, like this dude can absolutely just shoot lights out. There might be a team that just takes a chance on him and says, forget the size, we'll work around it. But you're looking at him and he only shot 36% or something like that this year. I think that there's a lot of good players. There's a lot of people that can shoot. I think it's going to be kind of tough for him. He shot 34.5%. I just looked it up. So, that's going to be tough to overcome with the size. He's 6'1", and I don't think he's probably actually 6'1".
Yeah. I was going to get to that. Everybody always throws around the Jalen Brunson comparison with Mark just because they kind of have a similar play style. But even Jalen Brunson, he measured in at his combine. I believe he was 6'1". Last year at the NBA combine, Mark Sears, who participated in it, he was, I believe, in the 5'10s. So he's even like,
that's right. And I don't know if, like you said, Jalen was at the 6'1". I'm looking at his ESPN profile right here, 6'2", 190. So I mean, maybe that's not his actual height either. But
I think it's they measure barefoot at the combine, so they lose a little bit. But
yeah,
I mean, 5'10", whatever the fractions were on that, that's not a very appealing height for NBA teams.
Right. Yeah, it's just going to be that's just so tough to overcome. Look, like I said, I think that you could probably get away with that height in other leagues, and I don't think basketball is over for him. I think he'll find he can have a whole professional career out of it. I think you can make it's just like the NBA is such a level above everything, but you can make some decent money overseas. I don't know I looked it up one time. It's not a bad life, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But he's probably going to have to kind of take that route. I like Mark Sears a lot. He's arguably the best Alabama basketball player of all time. It's just if he was 2 inches taller or 3 inches taller, I think this would be a much different story.
Yeah, and I even think though maybe the path for him is to go play in Europe and be in the Euro League and be in that type of role, but I do think Sears is going to get a shot in the NBA just because he did put together multiple productive seasons at the collegiate level, at the highest level. The height is obviously question mark, like we've talked about over the last 7 minutes, but I do see him getting a shot maybe in the G League or maybe at the end of an NBA bench. He'll just have to prove himself. He'll have to shoot really well, obviously. He's going to have to be one of those guys that you can insert in a lineup and he can get a bucket. Like, if he has bad minutes, his NBA career can fizzle out very quickly and he can end up in Europe or somewhere overseas.
The only thing what I'm seeing with Sears too is like, is he ever going to have a year better than, 2 seasons ago? I just don't think so, and it's like, I think that was the peak of his, that's as good as it gets for him. And you look at a guy like, so when you're thinking about drafting a guy like that, obviously, LeBaron's got some years on LeBaron, and I think that's going to, the potential, also the ceiling is not as high right there for Mark Sears. I think you kind of know what you have in Mark Sears, and I don't know if that's enough. And I don't know if he's going to develop. With LeBaron, if you're drafting him right now, you're looking at him and like, okay, this guy's super moldable. Like we can fix a lot of these problems and we can take it to the next level. For him, it's like everyone knows he's gonna reach those levels. It's just a matter of like how long it takes him to do it. With Mark, it's like, we're not sure he's going to reach that, and then like, what do you do with him? Is he also the defense? We talk so much about LeBaron's defense. That's not really Mark's game. He got a little bit better at it, but it's he's not your. I think if you're going to be that small, you're going to be a lockdown defensive guy. It's going to be just all over the place and just pickpocket kind of guy. And I don't know if he's that either. So. I mean, it's just tough. I feel dirty down talking Mark like this, but I just don't see it for him.
Hey, but for what it's worth, like you said, you can definitely find a great life overseas. And honestly, I'll admit, I was going down the Eurobasket rabbit hole last night. I was just watching TikToks of the European playoffs and stuff, and it is super entertaining over there. Like, I would love to see Mark Sears highlights playing for Barcelona or.
I was gonna say, do you have a country form?
Or something?
Him to Greece or Spain or Turkey? Where do you have him playing?
Yeah, man, I don't know. I really don't know at this point. But I mean, Eurobasket. Even Luka Doncic has said in interviews in the past he doesn't really watch NBA games. He watches Eurobasket more than NBA. He said so. it's pretty entertaining, and maybe it'll give us an excuse to watch some more basketball.
I mean,
maybe at a different level.
There would be way worse lives than playing a professional sport in Barcelona. That's a pretty cool place to live. In fact, it's probably a lot better than some of these G League cities.
For sure.
For that, don't feel too bad for Mark Sears if he does.
Would you rather play for the Maine Lobsters, or would you rather play in Istanbul or Barcelona? It's kind of I don't know.
I'm not going to make the NBA either way. Sign me up for Barcelona.
Yeah, and another guy
against Maine or wherever they play in Maine. Maine can be pretty. It's not.
Yeah, Maine is an awesome place. The lobster rolls.
I love how this has become low key like a Boston Celtics podcast as well.
It's a layup every time. But
it looks like you have a Celtics cap on. I know it's not, but we're just gonna pretend like
never. But another guy who's kind of on that fringe, is he an NBA guy or is he more overseas, is Alabama's third player that got invited to the draft combine, Grant Nelson. Grant obviously transferred over a couple seasons ago from North Dakota State and had some up and down years at Alabama. He impressed. He made a lot of highlight reel plays for Alabama, and I think all Alabama fans like Mark Sears are always going to appreciate what he did during his time wearing crimson. But Tony, how do you project Grant Nelson in this pre-draft process? I think he might be even a little more interesting to discuss than Sears.
I mean, you don't totally write him off with like the size like you do with Sears, because obviously, what is he like? 6'11", 6'10", 230 or something like that. I don't know if he's just athletic enough to do it at the. We saw some. There's some moments where you watch Grant and you're like, you know what? Maybe he's cooking a little bit, like maybe he could make it in the league. I don't know. I like his chances of maybe a team taking a flyer on him in the second round more than I do with a Mark Sears. But once again, I'm not like necessarily sold on him as an NBA draft prospect either. It's like, what do you kind of do with him? He's not necessarily like, the 3-point, we've seen him make some good 3-pointers, but he's not necessarily like enough of a 3-point threat. He's not like physical enough. And I think, like this season kind of like it would have had to be like this great season for him to really like develop into an NBA prospect. And like, I feel like the injuries just hurt him a lot. Like, not that he missed time with them. It's just like it hurt his development. He didn't get a chance to maybe take that next step. I think there's more of a player in there with Grant Nelson than there is, like you talk about like that ceiling. I think it's obviously a little bit higher with Grant than it is with Mark, but like, look at his 3-point shooting over the last 3 years, 26.9 at North Dakota State, 27.3 during the Final Four run year, and then 25.8 last season. It's not enough for a guy that's not really dominant in the paint either.
Yeah, Grant Nelson, he's 6'9", officially listed on Alabama's roster, I believe. And that's
no way.
Or that's what. Oh, he's 6'11". He's 6'11".
Yeah, I was gonna say no way. Yeah, like Alabama's definitely not gonna do him dirty like that. Yeah,
he'll probably measure more closer to 6'9" barefoot at the combine, though. I think that's probably the question mark. Like, what do you really do with a guy like Grant Nelson? Because at that build and with his athleticism, I kind of view him as like a potential stretch 4 player in the NBA. But if you want to be a stretch player, you have to be able to shoot at an efficient rate. And I feel like the thing that I was most discouraged about with Grant this past season is, you mentioned the injuries hurt him. I think it was also a confidence thing a lot. A lot of times you see players go into Nate Oats' system and just have this confidence where they'll just shoot every time they touch the basketball on the perimeter. I feel like it definitely from like mid-January through early March, we saw a lot of times where Grant Nelson would catch the ball and you'd be in a position where you would expect him to shoot and he'd hesitate, maybe try to drive in, rim run and take a contested layup or pass the ball off. And I think that honestly really hurt maybe some of the tape he could have given out to NBA teams. But I do agree with you where there might be a little higher ceiling there if he can figure out that shooting efficiency and maybe shoot at will a little more, if you will, then that may help him in terms of being an NBA guy. But I don't really know where you play Grant Nelson on an NBA rotation.
Yeah, I feel kind of, like I said, I feel kind of dirty, like bad talking or like kind of, kind of like pouring cold water on these guys as they're about to go to the NBA Combine. But like I said, probably maybe he makes it in the G League, and you kind of experiment with him a little bit more. Maybe you see him as like trying to think of, we'll go with a former Celtic, like a Kelly Olynyk, maybe, but then I think Kelly Olynyk was a little bit bigger than he is. So I'm trying to think of like a guy that can kind of shoot, that, isn't super physical, but maybe, I mean, Grant can rebound, it's not like he can't grab boards. He's just not necessarily like this dominant defensive guy. They're going to nitpick his game. Maybe, like I said, like maybe in the end of the second round, who knows? Maybe you just take a flyer on a guy like that.
And I think Grant might even be like, maybe his ceiling is being like a spark plug guy off the bench in the NBA, where you can insert him into your rotation kind of towards the end of the bench maybe, but when you put him in, he's going to give you solid effort. He's going to crash the boards, and that's kind of what he did for Alabama a lot. He was huge on the rebounding department for the Crimson Tide. So maybe that's his role in the NBA. But obviously there are a lot of questions to be answered with Grant Nelson, Mark Sears, and LeBaron Philon. And there's also a lot of questions to be answered in terms of Alabama's roster, but maybe we're getting some more clarity there. Alabama attacked the transfer portal this week in terms of filling out the rest of their roster. They added a player from Tarleton State, Tony.
Yeah, Keaton. I have to look at his name to say it right, but they got a guy from Tarleton State named Keaton. Hold on one second.
Keaton Bristow. I was trying to avoid. Yeah. I was trying to avoid pronouncing his first name too. That's why I kind of handed that.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure it was Keaton Bristow. Look, I think it's kind of like a sleeper pick. He's Keaton's a little bit kind of a like he was a 6'8" wing. First of all, for people that don't know about him, he's a 6'8" wing from Tarleton State. He was the WAC Player of the Year last season after getting 11.3 points and 4.3 rebounds. I think that's another big thing. We talked about that with Noah Williamson being from Bucknell and getting that Patriot League Player of the Year. I think it's it's nice to get these players from these small conferences that did well in their conference, and that played above that showed that played the way that you would expect an Alabama player to play in those conferences. So and to get those guys, I don't think Bristow's going to be a starting role guy, or really even like necessarily a high impact guy. Or at least he's not going to be relied on to be a high impact guy. I think he's kind of like just a bench guy, maybe even end of the bench kind of guy for Alabama. We'll see how the roster kind of fills out. But I've heard it be kind of thrown around like to be a Jaren replacement. I don't know if they're going to use him as much as Jaren. He's like I said, he's 6'8". He had 11.3 points, 4.3 rebounds. He shot 32.8% from beyond the arc and 46.1% from the floor. The thing about him too is he's a sophomore. He led all WAC freshmen, averaging 1.1 steals a game. So you're getting another long guy that can play defense. That's valuable in itself. I don't know how much he's going to contribute, how much of that offensive game is really going to, translate to the Alabama level. But at the same time, I think that he checks a lot of the boxes that you look at in a Nate Oats player, in terms of just being kind of lanky, kind of long, can play defense, can shoot threes, athletic kind of guy. And look, it's his second season, so he's going to be, probably moldable. We'll see if he takes that step. And there's been players that have come in and surprised, that have been surprises and can be better than expected. I don't expect him to be this big contributor for Alabama, but I mean, it's a deep bench and he's not a nobody. So there's a potential for him to be pretty good. It's just a matter of, kind of how the roster shakes out. I don't think they're bringing him in though to super rely on him.
Yeah, I just pulled up his KenPom page behind me just to get a brief glance on what he's good at. And one thing that jumps off the page for me is his free throw shooting. Alabama struggled a lot from the free throw line last season at points, and he ranked 5th in the WAC in terms of free throw shooting percentage at 86.5. And he's getting to the line at an efficient clip, and that's something that would really benefit Alabama. But another thing that jumps off the page is when you pull up a player's KenPom profile and it has all their stats listed up, KenPom has an algorithm that compares it to past players who had similar seasons. And his number one comparison is Robert Covington, a guy who had a long NBA career, was on the Sixers for a while, and I'm not. Is he still in the NBA? I believe so.
I mean,
I feel like
Alabama would take that, right?
yeah, I feel like Robert Covington was on the Clippers maybe not too long ago. But if you're getting, yeah, he is a Clipper, yeah. But if you're getting a guy like Robert Covington, I mean, I'm sure Alabama would love that.
Well, I mean, yeah, and look, you're losing, you're losing Grant, you're losing Jaron Stevenson to transfer, you're losing Mo Diabate to transfer, so you need those kind of big forwards to come in, and so maybe he does have, a little bit more of a role than I'm giving him credit for. I know Alabama brought in Taylor Bowen from Florida State, and he's going to handle that kind of four duty, in my opinion. Next to Aiden Sherrill at the 5, but I mean, yeah, maybe Bristol comes in and he's that backup for Bowen, and I think the fact that he can play defense, let's see, if he can kind of rebound. I mean, hopefully he can be a little bit more of a presence than I felt. Jaron was so frustrating sometimes because sometimes he did play that good defense. And then, sometimes I feel like he got blown by, and I don't think he was much of a. He definitely didn't play to his size. Bristow, what's Jaron? Jaron's like what 6'10", right? And so Bristow's 6'8". So you're getting a little bit smaller. But then again, I think if you're trying to get him to be a Jaron replacement, and you're trying to fill that role from last year's team, I don't think Jaron always played to his size. So maybe it doesn't really matter. Look, I think if he comes in and he, kind of has this, like I said, he checks the right boxes. I'm kind of excited with this guy to see what Nate Oats does with him. You know what I'm saying? Like, how he develops. He wasn't necessarily somebody that was on. He kind of came out of nowhere in terms of a target. I mean, I'm sure Alabama scouted him, and but in terms of like people that we thought Alabama was going to target, he just kind of popped up out of nowhere. But Alabama likes what they've seen in him. He's got a lot of potential, and so he's just a guy to watch. The excitement radar with me here is not as high initially, but I could see it going up. Especially like he's one of these guys that maybe by the end of the summer we're talking about like, oh wow, this guy can cook. We're a lot more excited about this guy than we were when Alabama first brought him in. We'll just have to see. But I'll be interested to kind of see how he develops and what his role will be. And, there's two more spots on this roster. So I mean, theoretically, Alabama could bring in another guy. They can bring in two guys, and I guess that's going to be the biggest thing moving forward. Is kind of like, where does he shape up when the dust settles and Alabama does make those moves or doesn't?
Yeah, Keaton Bristow became the 4th player that Alabama added this offseason by the transfer portal. And maybe, like you said, he doesn't fill out that excitement radar as some of the other guys like Noah Williamson, Taylor Bowen, and Jaleel Bethea, who we know a little more about. But I think the big headline for Alabama basketball this portal cycle was potentially reuniting with a former player. Ryland Griffin was a contributor, a pretty big contributor for Alabama during their Final Four run in 2024. And he ended up leaving last offseason, went to Kansas for a season, and he re-entered the transfer portal, and there was a lot of buzz about him potentially returning and reuniting with Nate Oats. He took a visit to Alabama. However, not everything worked out, and he's going to be ending up back in the SEC. He'll see Alabama next year multiple times potentially. Ryland Griffin off to Texas A&M. Tony, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, for a while there, I mean, like when Ryland initially visited, it kind of felt like he was like Alabama was going to be the team, that reunion kind of looked like it was going to happen. From what I've heard, there were stipulations that Alabama put that Ryland didn't want to reach. A&M is paying him more money, significantly more money than Alabama would have. But from what I've heard, that's not necessarily the deciding factor. I think there was just some stipulations that Alabama had. Ryland wasn't so high on, just some disagreements there. And I think, ultimately that led that, obviously money doesn't hurt, right? And that led him to go to Texas A&M. And also he's a Texan, he's from Texas. So, it's kind of like going home to go to Texas A&M. So, it's it could be a really good fit for him. They're not playing that terroristic basketball that they did. Yeah, so I'm just excited about kind of the rivalry, I guess, with, Bucky and, after Trendon Watford, the whole saga with him choosing LSU in the from Mountain Brook with Bucky, and then going to LSU over Alabama, and now you have Ryland. Now Bucky comes in first season, steals a guy that Alabama thought they were going to get. I wonder, first of all, the reception that Bucky's going to get from the Alabama crowd, and I kind of wonder the reception, like, what is Ryland going to get from the Alabama crowd? I mean, because he's a guy that Alabama loved, and it's almost like, I don't think there was a lot of hatred towards him when he went to Kansas, but then you almost come back and then you go to an SEC team. I wonder if that's going to rub Alabama fans the wrong way. It'll just be interesting. Look, I'll always see Ryland as a key, member of that Final Four team, and I feel like he always has a spot, in the Alabama, family, I guess, if you wanted to say, for from that. I'd be surprised if the fans were super hard on him. But it will be interesting. I kind of like the extra spice that move, added.
Yeah, you made a lot of good points there. It's going to be fun to see his reception, like you said. I feel like it was kind of a surprise for him to go to Kansas. I mean, it kind of felt like Alabama was almost running the entire thing back last season, bringing back all their top contributors, and then Ryland Griffin skips town. So that'll be interesting for sure. And then the whole Bucky McMillan thing. For those who follow Alabama statewide college basketball, Bucky McMillan kind of made Samford into a little powerhouse in the SoCon over the past few years, getting them to the NCAA tournament. Were they in it last season or no? No, they weren't, right?
I don't believe they did, so. Right? I think Samford did make the tournament, right?
I thought, did they? I know they were for sure in it 2 years ago.
I thought they did, but anyway.
I don't.
Regardless.
I think it may have been UT Chattanooga.
No, it was NIT. It was NIT. My bad. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
that was 2 years ago.
NIT.
I'm getting it confused. Finished
and
third in the SoCon last year. Yeah.
They had that crazy game 2 years ago in the NCAA tournament too.
That's what I'm. Yeah.
Yeah. But I lived in Homewood. I went to high school at Homewood High School, right across the street from Samford. So I supported Samford's program under Bucky.
They also had the Mountain Brook and the prospects that he developed there. So
you kind of got to support the hometown team. So it's fun. His system is super fun to watch, and I'm excited to see how Ryland can fit into that. But definitely,
it'll be way better than Buzz, man. I can't stand watching that kind of basketball. So it'll be a lot more. It'll be a better brand of basketball, than what they've been seeing in College Station. So, but I will point out that, when Ryland went to Kansas, it did not work out for him. He took a step back. So, I mean, that was, I think, another reason why coming back to Alabama made sense. Like you work in Nate's system. It's kind of like when you look at, Ryland Griffin, I think he can be an NBA guy. He has a lot of those projectable skills, but, he kind of needs to do it this year. And, he didn't do it last year. I don't know. I feel like for Ryland, he's taken a little bit more of a risk by going to Texas A&M than it would have been to come to Alabama. That being said, I mean, the money's better. You're going home, and look, I like Bucky McMillan. I think that he's got a good system, and I don't hate that fit. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, for those who are following what we've been talking about, because we've kind of gotten off the tracks a little bit here. But Bucky McMillan runs a really fast-paced system. Alabama obviously ranked 1 nationally last year in possessions per game. Nate Oats, very high-paced, fast system. They had 78.5 possessions per game, which was a whole possession higher than the next closest team, being Cal Poly. But Samford ranked 24 with 73.9, so they run a really fast-paced system themselves and kind of bringing that into the other part of the SEC. But getting back towards Alabama a little bit, Tony, I believe you said they have 2 spots open left. So how do you foresee Alabama and Nate Oats kind of attacking the rest of this summer and offseason, maybe trying to fill out their roster a little bit, or maybe just standing pat on what they have currently?
Look, now that Ryland didn't sign with Alabama, I'm kind of thinking they're going to go with 12. There's no real need to just bring in the 13th guy to bring in a 13th guy. I mean, maybe they could do that, but you look at it, I think Ryland would have been, starting caliber. I'm not sure that there's a starting caliber guy that Alabama is going to bring in without just totally breaking the bank. I will say that they're going to have to find another point guard caliber, like just a guard that can distribute. So whether that's LeBaron Philon coming back or whether that's going to the portal and grabbing someone, I think that they're going to address that. They're not going to sit at 11. But I do think that, like, I would almost put it unlikely at the moment that they go to 13. Look, like, Nate Oats has had redshirt players the last 2 years, so it's not necessarily like that he needs 13. You're not going to play 13. They're pretty deep and they're pretty versatile in terms of the roster. They're not once you get that ball distributor, whether it's LeBaron or another guard, I think you got enough of a rotation. I think they're pretty comfortable. They'd have to be multiple injuries in terms to, to really have to worry about having 13 players. I think they're fine. They might just take someone to take someone, but I don't know if like the Ryland replacement's going to be, somebody notable if they do. And honestly, I'm not the portal's closed right now, Henry. So I don't know if the point guard player is not going to be like, they're not bringing in PJ Haggerty and spending $4 million on him or Boogie Flan. They're not going to spend crazy money on him either. I don't think that they're not bringing RJ Luis Jr. in to replace Ryland. That they're not bringing in these 5-star guys. It's going to cost $4 million to get the kind of 5-star point guards. So I don't think they're doing that. I do think that they'd shell out a lot of money for LeBaron, but once you get off of those elite, just high price guards, a lot of the portal's been picked over. We're at that kind of that time where teams are kind of they have to kind of go with what they can. You maybe need another Keaton Bristow point guard version, or a guy that did well at a small league that you don't initially think of, and maybe Alabama has one of those guys up their sleeves where he comes out of nowhere, and then you just start looking at him and you're like, oh, this guy didn't jump off the page to me at first, but he makes sense and he can do a lot of the things. But I do think they need that point guard, because right now, you have 6'1", 180 Aiden Holloway, who didn't start last season, and combo guard Latrell Wrightsell, who's not even a point guard and is coming off an Achilles injury, and those are your 2 point guard options. I think you need another dude in there. At this point, are you fooling around and maybe playing? I guess Jaleel Bethea could do it. He could play some. And I don't think, it'd be great to have LeBaron, and I think he would fit that kind of traditional point guard guy. But I don't think you need to bring in John Stockton to come play point guard in Nate Oats' system. It can be a guy that can. You saw it with LeBaron and Mark. They're both on the court at the same time, and they kind of played off each other. There wasn't necessarily always a defined point guard guy. Look, Alabama doesn't run a lot of set plays on offense. They go so fast that I don't think that they necessarily, there's concepts that they'll teach, these players, but there's not you don't have, okay, this guy's, it's got to start with the point guy and he's got to set everything up. I don't think that's the case with the way Nate Oats is going to run the offense. It hasn't been. So a guy like Jaleel Bethea could run the offense or could step into that point guard role. Same with Latrell Wrightsell. Same with, Aiden Holloway. Sorry, my mind was going blank. And then even a guy weren't they talking a little bit of Houston Millette when he came in, is maybe fooling around with him being some kind of distributing guard. He's kind of more of a wing, but still there's options on the court. I just still think you need to add a little bit more depth, whether it's just another guy that kind of fits the mold. Even if they brought in another guy with the same skill set as Jaleel Bethea, at least you have another guy that could maybe add himself into that mix and be a distributor.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of touches on everything we had planned to talk about today. Tony, do you have any parting thoughts?
It's going to be interesting. We're in kind of that dead zone, man. So we're just kind of looking for for content. We'll see how. I think the portal is the most interesting thing right now. So I'm kind of interested to see how this basketball roster shakes up. I think we're done with we kept it to basketball in this pod, but I think we're kind of done with football. So in terms of notable additions, it might just be like LeBaron or bust when it comes to the big headline stealing, summer blockbuster move for Alabama. So he'll be an interesting story to follow for sure.
Yeah. Well, once again, we appreciate you guys tuning into Tide Pod as always. Stay tuned to the site for content. We're going to keep rolling on there. We'll definitely have content despite, the little lull period. So always stay tuned, and we'll of course have Tide Pod every week. So appreciate you guys tuning in again, and have a nice day.